and became a halo skydiver. Took my first altitude chamber flight at 17, and I've continued to jump and skydive for my entire life. I currently have over 12,000 jumps. Most of those are tandem jumps. I don't know if the audience is familiar with what tandem jumps are. Uh, and then I became a pilot. I got very interested in aviation, and because I also had a physiology background, I continued with my physiology education during my flying. Uh, I ended up working for a parachute company many years ago after I got out of the Army and was their test jumper. Did a lot of low altitude jumps, did a lot of high altitude jumps, and somehow in a roundabout way ended up here at our parent company called Environmental Tectonics Corporation. They needed a test pilot to fly their flight simulators. So I happily volunteered and was hired to do that. I went back to the School of Aviation Medicine in Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, and rounded out my physiology training. Uh, and what we started off here at ETC was physiology training for military pilots all around the world. We train clients from South America, Europe, Africa, uh, Japan, the Far East, literally thousands of military pilots. And then the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy caught wind of what we were doing and said, hey, you guys have some pretty cool equipment. We want to buy some and we want to train our own pilots. But we don't know how to train. So we ended up teaching their instructors how to do high G training, how to do ejection seat training, altitude chamber training, and all that physiology stuff. Um, and then we got into space training soon after the Ansari X Prize was won. This is when Burt Rutan's spaceship flew twice within the same week. They won the X Prize. And then Richard Branson bought into that technology and started Virgin Galactic. So we saw this as an opportunity to use our equipment and our expertise to start training for space. The technology, the training, the human physiology for high G pilot training is very much the same for space training. So if you're going to fly into space, you're going to undergo the same G forces, the same physiological effects as a fighter pilot would. Okay, at different levels, of course. So we opened up the NASTAR Center back in 2007, and we have an entire suite of training equipment here, which has been FAA approved, and we are the first and currently the only training center that's FAA approved for commercial spaceflight training. Okay. Now, before I get into the details of the equipment, let me show you this video. Laura, I know you've been to NASTAR many years ago, so this might become very familiar to you. But for anybody who's never been to NASTAR or never been to our website, this might be an interesting video. So let me play that here. So if you can see the
Okay,
video, I'll narrate as we go.
great.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. But this is one of the training areas of the NASTAR Center. And you're seeing disorientation trainers, you're seeing ejection seat trainers. This is the centrifuge that we use for space training. This is the altitude chamber that we use for high altitude training. This is the control room of the centrifuge area. And we're just showing that we do medical monitoring. This is the cockpit of the space training capsule that we use for space training. Here's another classroom. This is the centrifuge in motion. This is the visual scene that the trainees see. That's Alex Ty from Virgin Galactic. That's the scene that the trainees see. This is our altitude chamber. We do a lot of spacesuit testing there. This is inside the altitude chamber. This is some of the medical monitoring and research uh, capabilities that we have. Here's spacesuit testing. There's a centrifuge in motion. And that silver cockpit you see at the end is where the trainees sit. And as you spin, you're subjected to various levels of G forces.
That was
I'll slide
perfect.
that up. Yeah.
And I don't know if
Uh,
you mentioned it, but so NASTAR Center is located outside of Philadelphia. Why that location? How did it end up there?
well, our parent company, ETC, started here about 70 years ago. This is where our founder's home is. So this is where he started. We decided just to break off a portion of the original factory and build the NASTAR Center. So that's why we're located here in Southampton, Pennsylvania. Yeah, we don't have any other training centers anywhere else in the world. This is our only location. And the reason for that is some of these devices, like the centrifuge and the altitude chamber, they're very, very expensive. That human centrifuge that you saw in the video is is the only FAA approved centrifuge out there, and it's also the only FAA approved centrifuge that's available for civilians to use. So they can come in, fly the centrifuge, do training, do research. There are many centrifuges around the world. However, most of them are restricted to military use. They want to train their military pilots on those centrifuges. If civilians want to come and jump in a centrifuge for training, you really can't go anywhere else because the military won't allow you in into their centrifuge. So they come here, and that's why we're available. Okay. Um, we've had the honor of training. We have Virgin Galactic as one of our primary customers. They were the first and our founding customers. I personally have trained Richard Branson, and I've trained over 450 of their future astronauts, as they're called. I've trained SpaceX. We've trained the Inspiration 4 crew. We trained the Polaris Dawn 4. And we trained for Axiom Space. We've trained the Axiom X1 through X5 crews. So, and then we trained a lot of private individuals who are enthusiasts that want to go through the training and see what it's like to be an astronaut for a day, but maybe not have the financial ability to buy an expensive ticket to actually go into space. They come here and they be an astronaut for a day or 2 days, depending on the program. When we go through our training here, we have either 1 day or we have 2 day programs. And these programs are set up for orbital space flights or suborbital space flights. If you're a Virgin Galactic ticket holder, you're probably going to be interested in taking the 2 day suborbital spaceflight training. And what we're able to do in the centrifuge is we've taken flight data from Virgin Galactic and modeled that into our centrifuge. And when trainees come here and train, they get the exact same flight dynamics, which means the G forces, the vibrations, the visual displays. All this is exactly as the actual spaceship. And we did the same with SpaceX. We got their flight data for their ascent profile, for their reentry profile, and their emergency abort profiles. We actually take that flight data, model it in the centrifuge, and then test it. We've had Jarek Isaacman, who's flown with SpaceX, and he's come back here for his Polaris Dawn crew training. And he said that the flight profile was exactly right. And he says it was just perfect. Uh, we spent months and months tweaking each of these profiles to make sure they give the exact flight dynamics as close as we can to the actual vehicle. And that's what we're able to successfully do. So, it's very exciting when trainees come in. Uh, Most of the professional pilots and crew, like the Inspiration 4 crew, the Polaris Dawn crew, all the Axe 1 through Axe 5 crews. When they come here, they're determined. They have a mission, they're focused. Okay. But when the Virgin Galactic crews come in and the private individuals come in, they don't know what to expect. But they are very excited and they're very determined to get through the program. And the difference in training here is that we provide realistic training. Uh, People come here and say, well, I've experienced with G forces, I've ridden a lot of roller coasters. That's not quite the same. People say, well, I fly aerobatic airplanes. It's not quite the same. Okay. When we talk about sustained G forces, this is G forces that are applied to your body in two different vectors, in a GX vector, which is a fore and aft vector, and in the GZ vector, which is the vertical direction. And you can't get these sustained in aircraft or in roller coasters or even in driving a very fast car because they just won't sustain these. Uh, the Virgin Galactic flight profile is a very dynamic flight profile. And what I mean by dynamic is that it subjects the crew and the passengers to what's known as an angular acceleration vector. And what that means is when your spaceship launches horizontally, you get a GX vector. And then it makes this turn to go vertical. That turn is called an angular acceleration turn, where the pilots and the crew are subjected to multiple G vectors simultaneously. So you're getting a GX this way and a GZ this way at the same time, which is very strenuous, and training is absolutely required for that. And the difference is on a SpaceX type launch, and you've seen the videos of the SpaceX launches, the Apollo type launches, the shuttle launches. They launch in a vertical direction, and the pilots and the crew are all in a supine position. So they get a single vector. And the GX vector is a little bit more tolerable than a GX vector, the GZ vector, I'm sorry. Okay. So trainees come here, they're very excited. They earn their patch, they earn their wings, they get their training certificate, and they're good to go. Okay.
That I did the Virgin Galactic profile. It was just absolutely amazing. And I do remember the altitude chamber and feeling euphoric when I was going through the early stages of hypoxia. It was all really fun
Yeah.
for me. I know
Yeah.
others don't have, as much fun. But for me, I was like the man in that picture who you said is from Virgin Galactic. It was just all smiles. That was me. That was just all
Yeah.
smiles. But I imagine
Yeah,
it's
it's
great.
it's such a great experience, and for you to have
It is.
experienced it, you actually experienced the Virgin Galactic space flight profile. And that took you through that angular acceleration, it took you through the reentry, all that. And then you actually
Yes.
went in the altitude chamber and got to experience hypoxia. Hypoxia training is becoming more and more important because we have companies that are going to be launching balloons up into space. And if these depressurize or if there's a non-pressurization issue, hypoxia is going to become a factor. Rapid decompression is going to become a factor. So it's important that crew and pilots and passengers, tourists, that they all receive training in hypoxia and rapid decompression, especially if they're going to be wearing spacesuits. There's a whole other realm of training required if people are going to wear spacesuits. Um, Virgin Galactic, they don't wear spacesuits, and they're going to 365,000 feet. Um, SpaceX, they wear spacesuits, but they're not pressure suits at the moment. Now, the Polaris Dawn crew will have spacesuits because they're going to do a EVA. And the issue with the EVA is that they don't have a lock system where they can depressurize only a portion of the cockpit. The entire uh, Dragon capsule will become depressurized. So all the occupants inside will have to be on a spacesuit while one person's doing their spacewalk. And that's going to be Jared Isaacman doing the spacewalk. but everybody will have a chance to poke their heads out of the hatch and look around into space. So that's pretty exciting. But companies like Blue Origin, you've seen their launches and their videos. They don't wear spacesuits either, and they're going up to suborbital altitudes. Uh, I'm sure the New Glenn ship, which is going to be an orbital ship and even a moon mission ship, you're going to have spacesuits for that. Okay, but training for altitude, G forces, um, it's really important that people go through this training because it's not like an airline flight. It's not like a roller coaster ride, and people just really have no clue. But you understand now. You've been through here, so and
I
but
would
the
need to take
biggest
that
comment I
refresher
get.
training.
I'm sorry.
I would need to take that refresher training that I know you do.
Okay. Well, you're gonna have to come back and do this again. But
Absolutely. And it's a blast.
yeah,
I do have a question here that I think the audience is probably interested in. And after I
sure.
ask this, I want to open it up to audience questions. Let's say someone in the audience is not associated with a Blue Origin Virgin Galactic SpaceX mission. They just want to go and try out to see if they can do spaceflight training for a future flight. How can they do that? What's the process?
The process is really simple. You send me an email. Say, hey, Glenn, I want to do an orbital or I want to do a suborbital spaceflight training program. I'll send you some paperwork. We'll book a date and we'll take your paperwork and your payment and we'll get you in here and you'll do it. Costs, I know that's the next step in everybody's mind. Um, these programs run from between $3,000 to $8,000. Okay, depending on the type of program you take, the number of profiles you're going to take. People with disabilities can participate. Uh, Classically, in the past, people who are selected for the astronaut corps were top-notch people in the best of health. These were test pilots with a known medical history. But now, with the advent of commercial space, and especially with the planning of putting habitats on the moon, habitats on Mars, we're looking at building space hotels and resorts in space. We're going to need a lot of workers to go to space to build these. And these workers that are going to go to space have to be allowed to have medical infirmaries. You know, if you don't have perfect 20/20 vision, if you don't have perfect hearing, you got mild arthritis, you got a case of diabetes, things like this have to be allowed to be go to space. Inspiration 4 crew, Haley Arsenault, had a prosthetic portion of her leg. I recently trained a Argentinian citizen named Juan Maggie who had polio since he was 1 year old, and he's now got a ticket to fly with Virgin Galactic. We had a research program with the University of Texas Medical Branch for 2 years or so, where we had people with specific disabilities come through here and go through the training program. They were extensively medically monitored. And the end result was that we see that about 96% of a population can go to space. So if you have a dream to go, we can help you accomplish that. Basically, start off with sending me an email. And if you want to be astronaut for a day and go through the training, I guarantee you will go through the exact same training programs that the Inspiration 4 crews go through or the Virgin Galactic crews go through. You get the authentic experience. And you get a free flight suit from NASTAR Center. I don't know if you got yours, Laura, but
I
it's
do. I still have it. Yes.
okay. Excellent.
That is
So
great.
that's the process for getting in the NASTAR Center. You can go to our website. My email is on there, and just send me an email, and we'll start the process from there.
Excellent. I will include the email in the chat or the website in the
Okay.
chat, as well as when I post the video recording in the community, I'll include the address there as well. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. You can either type it in the chat, or I should have all of your um, mics and cameras if you want to do it that way. I already see questions popping up. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Donna asks, You mentioned people with disabilities can train. Are there any medical conditions which would preclude training with you? Thanks.
Yeah, there are a few, and basically they center on any cervical or spinal injuries or fusions. Because of the G forces involved and the pressure on the spinal cord, we really want to avoid anybody that's had spinal operations, spinal fusions, ruptured disc, things like that. That's about the only thing that would preclude you from going through spaceflight training and actually going into space.
I had that same question, Donna, so thank you for asking. And she says, great. Thomas asks, are some of the primary differences between roller coasters and training with NASTAR, the directions and duration of the Gs?
Yeah, very different. Uh, Let me start with roller coasters. Most of the G forces you experience on a roller coaster ride is when you come to the bottom of a large hill and you turn and go back uphill. That's a 1 to 1.5 second G load on the person. And it's mostly in the GZ vector, the vertical direction. You get pushed down in your seat, okay? But the duration isn't very long. The reentry profile for Virgin Galactic lasts about 5 minutes, okay? And it builds up to a high of 6 Gs and then ramps back down. But across that time frame, it's 5.5 to 6 minutes. So that's what we mean by a sustained G force. Very different and not obtainable in a roller coaster or in an airplane.
Yeah, that is helpful to know. And I know that when I did the NASTAR training in the centrifuge, it was nothing like I ever experienced before. And Thomas says, wow, that is very different. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anybody else have any questions? And while you're thinking of your questions, I am curious about the spacesuit research because I don't think that was going on when I was there. So I'm sure there's a lot of institutes and companies that are designing spacesuits both for NASA and for commercial purposes. And I'm curious to know about the spacesuit research going on in the altitude chamber.
Ah, we tested the 1035 spacesuits that were manufactured by David Clark Company. These are the orange pressurized suits that you saw the space shuttle crew wear. Now, there's another suit called the CHAPS suit that David Clark is building, and this is a commercial application of a pressurized spacesuit. We've tested those. In fact, in the video that you saw a man with the space helmet sitting in the cockpit. That was the chap suit that we were testing. We tested it not only in the altitude chamber, but we also tested it in the centrifuge. Uh, there's a company in Wilmington, Delaware called ILG. I think it's been bought by Paragon now, but they're building a spacesuit for NASA also. Uh, they don't have an altitude chamber. We do. So they want to come here and test their suits up to space altitudes. Our chamber can go up to 120,000 feet, which is high enough. We check the pressurization of the suit. We check the mobility and operation. We change the temperature in the chamber to see if there's any fogging or frosting, especially in the exhaust valve areas that you don't want them to fog up or frost up. Because then we have a hypercapnia condition, which is an excess of carbon dioxide. So, but what you get when you're here at NASTAR is a really slick looking, a little bit baggy flight suit with a NASTAR patch on it. And you got a good place to put your wings that you're awarded when you graduate the program.
It's the
Yeah.
only flight suit that still fits me because I had my Space Camp Huntsville, Alabama flight suit that doesn't quite fit me anymore, but my NASTAR flight suit does.
Yeah.
Thomas asks another question here. 96% of the population can go to space. That's a surprisingly high number, which I love, but I'm curious, where did that number come from?
It came from our study at the University of Texas Medical Branch. We tested about 300 people pulled from the general population, and we specifically targeted those that had minor infirmaries, prosthetic devices. They had implantable devices like an insulin pump. We had people with other implantables like fake shoulders, replacement knees, replacement hips, all kinds of things like that. And 98% of all those that we tested uh, completed the training program and successfully flew all the profiles. Now, we did have an astronaut, I think his name was, let me see, I got it written down, Michael Clifford, who flew on a couple of the STS missions, flew up to Mir, and was up in the space station. He flew with Parkinson's disease. Now, it wasn't publicized at the time, and they kept that a secret, but they had to finally ground him because they found out about it, and he had trouble with mobility and getting and donning and doffing his his spacesuit. So that's how it was uncovered. But he did fly to space 3 times with that minor infirmary. So that's how he got the 98% number. Um, Also, it's a great number because companies like Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, they can sell more tickets. And that's ultimately what they want to do. But my goal is to get more people to space. If you've got a dream, I really want to help you fulfill that.
Uh, Thomas replies, "That's so cool, thanks." And Jonathan had said, "Interesting."
Good.
I'm curious whether you would go.
I would. And in fact, here's a funny story. When I was training the Virgin Galactic founders group, which were the first 200, I had one lady in my class who was very, very nervous. Uh, and at lunchtime, she come up to me and she said, "Hey, Glenn, if I bought a ticket for you, would you sit next to me and hold my hand and help me get through this?" Tickets at that time with Virgin Galactic were $250,000. And ethically, I really couldn't do it. I said, "Look, you can buy me lunch, you can buy me a beer, but I can't accept that generous gift." But if Richard Branson had offered that to me, that's a different story because he's president of the company. He can, blah blah blah. But I couldn't take it from a client of mine. I just can't do that. But yes, I would definitely go to space in a heartbeat. William Shatner was 90 years old when he went to space. I'm not quite that old yet, but I would go in an instant.
Yeah, there's still time. Wally Funk was 82. I mean, there's time.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's see. We
All
got
us older generation, we all want to go. We're still
exactly.
18 in heart.
And I don't know, how old Donna is, but she's older generation as well. This is the most encouraging thing I've heard of for myself. Oh, that's really great, Donna, because I know you've been through health issues. So I'm glad to hear that you're encouraged. Oh, she's 65.
Excellent. You can still go.
Great. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions, but I also want to know how. Oh, and Jonathan says awesome, and Thomas says, Donna, I absolutely agree. I have a medical issue that has me concerned, but this is great. So that you're really encouraging our group here. So thank you, Glenn. This is great. Um,
Good.
how do you see the training evolving as different players? You've got SpaceX and Axiom now flying private crews to the space station. You've got these commercial space station destinations, LEO destinations. You've got future lunar missions, in addition to the suborbital training, which I know you've been doing for a while. So, how do you see the NASTAR Center evolving with the commercial space sector?
I see us evolving more and more into the medical screening area. The training is easy, and what we provide is very specialized training, which is the physiology training to endure, to launch and re-enter, and all that stuff. The launch providers, whether it's Virgin Galactic or Axiom or SpaceX, they still have to provide specific training for things like cockpit ingress, cockpit egress, emergency procedures training, how to put your suits on, take them off, and stuff like that. So there'll always be hybrids of training between companies like NASTAR and SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and people like that. Uh, I also see training happening maybe on Mars and on Moon. We have a large core of analog astronauts out there. They're doing research and studies on longevity on planets and isolation studies and radiation, solar study, all this stuff that they're going to need to have on the Moon and on Mars, especially when you're there for months and years, possibly at a time. So people are going to need to get training, and then they're going to probably need to get refresher training on site, whether that's up at a space resort or on the moon or on Mars. So training is going to evolve and change as the dynamic requirements of the space program is changing.
So let me guess, you're going to volunteer to be on that analog site elsewhere, whether it's a Leo or the moon. You'll be the first trainer there.
Sure, absolutely.
Sounds wonderful. I want to know some more practicalities. Back when I was doing it, we went through in groups. I don't remember the size of my group off the top of my head. It was I don't know, maybe six of us. I'm wondering if it still goes by cohorts like that, or if it's one-on-one training, or if it depends on the client and the mission.
It depends on the client and the mission. If I have an individual that is interested in space training, what I'll do is I'll blend them into another class with other trainees. Of course, training with SpaceX crew or Virgin Galactic crew, that's all private. But I do get a lot of spaceflight participants who want to go through their training just as an experience, and I can blend everybody together. And class sizes are limited to 6 to 8 maximum. We have capacity for more, but my problem is that I like to give away free rides. So even though the program only calls for 6 space flights required to complete the program, you'll actually end up getting about 8 or 9, some cases 10. It depends. So the smaller the class, the better off you are.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's incentive to keep them small. More people can ride. And then I know that when I went through the program, there was also classroom instruction. I assume that there's still that kind of practical lessons as well.
Correct. Yes. We just have the academic portion of the training. That's very important so trainees will understand the dynamics, the G forces. We teach them countermeasures for the G forces, like the anti G straining maneuver. We teach them a pressure breathing technique. We teach them, if you go through the altitude course, how to recognize symptoms of hypoxia, hypercapnia, hyperventilation, things like that. So it's very important that trainees get the complete understanding from an academic viewpoint and the physical training viewpoint.
I know when I was going through the training, I was the only one of my group that got the tunnel vision.
Ah,
So and it was your education. It was you teaching me the anti-G training that helped me come back from that.
that's why the training is so important. That's why the authentic portion of training is so important. If you just jumped into a vehicle and all of a sudden you started having tunnel vision, which is a normal physiological reaction, you wouldn't know what was going on. You'd probably panic. Okay, so now that you understand it and you understand the countermeasures to apply to peripheral vision loss, as we say, you know what to do. Okay. Um, Actually, I can tell by that you have a very low resting blood pressure. 'Cause that's a sign of good health. That's a sign of being in good condition. If you're old like me and you have hardened arteries and high blood pressure, we don't get that because that's an advantage that we have as being an old person. But
I was in my mid 20s back then. Donna says, is there anything that we can do ahead of time by way of online learning?
we don't really offer any online training. There's a lot of videos you can watch on YouTube about training flights at NASTAR, G-force training with pilots. You can learn about G-lock. You can learn about hypoxia. So you can learn about all these things by watching on YouTube and those kind of videos. But I equate that to kind of trying to learn how to swim by reading a book. You can read a book about learning how to swim. You can take a written test. You can pass that written test, but it doesn't mean you know how to swim. So that's why you need to come here and say, yeah, you can learn all about this, but until you actually experience it, it's different. And I think you can attest to that. You know,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
yeah.
That firsthand experience is something that you can't get elsewhere. Donna says, got it. Jonathan had to jump off, but he says, great interview. Thank you. And I know that we're wrapping up here. And again, the practicalities, I posted the link to the NASTAR Center website right there in the chat. And do you take people year round? Is there any kind of limitation there? And is it, I think it was 2 days of the training. Is it still 2 days?
Yes, yes. We have a 2 day suborbital and we have the 1 day orbital. Now,
All
it
right.
sounds like why would an orbital, which is more complex, be only 1 day? It's because of the flight dynamics that are involved. The Virgin Galactic flight has a much more dynamic profile because of that angular acceleration turn, whereas the SpaceX flight profile is just a pure vertical liftoff type turn. So
Makes sense.
very different.
And I know at least one member of our audience is booked for one of those high altitude balloon missions. So,
Oh,
how does
excellent.
that training work?
Then they should come here and at least go through the hypoxia and rapid decompression training program. So if something occurs at altitude, even if you just go up to like as high as Pikes Peak, people can get hypoxia at the top. They call it mountain sickness or altitude sickness, but technically it's hypoxia. And you need to be able to recognize your personal symptoms of that.
Absolutely. So all of the things that you need to do in person, go see Glenn King, go to the NASTAR Center. Thank you so much, Glenn, for joining us today. This was really informative. I have a feeling that a lot of people got a lot out of this. Donna says, thanks, Glenn. It was fantastic. Um, Thomas says, I plan to come and train with you. No, not Thomas. Actually, it's Brooke. Brooke says, I plan to come and train with you. Thank you for this. And Brooke's the one I know that has one of those tickets booked for a balloon flight. Thomas
Okay.
says, thank you, Glenn. This has been awesome and encouraging.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, the entire audience, for putting up with me. And I hope to see you in space sometime.